Howdy, it's Kyle with part 2 of Ethnic Enclaves and Immigrant Areas. I'll be looking at many different ethnic and nationality groups and where they came to in the US and largest concentration. Part 1 focused on the immigrant groups that came over in larger numbers, but I wanted to focus in this video on the groups that came over in smaller numbers. And I'll put the ethnic groups in alphabetical order if you're interested in searching through them like that, but let's take a look at where some of these groups that came over in smaller numbers came to in the US. The Azores are an island chain in the North Atlantic Ocean that's part of the country of Portugal. The majority of the Portuguese immigrants in California are actually from the Azores, and where you find the largest concentration of people with Azorean ancestry are in the counties of Stanislaus and Tulare in the San Joaquin Valley. People from Barbados are referred to as Bajans, and you have a fairly large number of them living in North Philadelphia and parts of town where you have many other Caribbean immigrants. The Basque are a unique ethnic group that's found primarily in north-central Spain or southwestern France, but they've never had their own country. They've immigrated to the U.S. in relatively small numbers, but came mostly to Boise, Idaho, and Bakersfield, California, with the largest numbers in Boise. Belgians immigrated to the U.S. in smaller numbers than most other Western European countries, but where you find the largest number of people with Belgian ancestry is in the Green Bay area and the Door County Peninsula of Wisconsin. Bhutan is a relatively small and very isolated country in the Himalayas in Asia. There haven't been a large number of refugees or immigrants from Bhutan, but where you find the largest number of them are in the Atlanta suburb of Clarkston. Bolivia represents the third smallest Latin American immigrant group in the U.S., so there are not large numbers of Bolivians in the country, but where you do find the most are in Fairfax County, Virginia, a suburb of D.C. The Burmese are people from the country of Burma or Myanmar in Southeast Asia, and they can be of many different ethnic groups. Many have come over to the U.S. as refugees, and the number one place for them to have come to is Indianapolis. Cambodians are one of the smallest Asian groups to have emigrated to the U.S., but where you find a large concentration of Cambodians is in the part of Long Beach, California called Cambodia Town. Most of the earliest Cambodian immigrants were highly educated and professional, but many years later most of the immigrants were refugees. Chamorro is the name of the ethnic group indigenous to the islands of Guam and the Northern Mariana Islands in the Pacific, both of which are part of the U.S. So most Chamorro are Americans, but where you find the most Chamorro on the mainland is Tacoma, Washington. Congolese immigrants refers to people from the Republic of Congo or the DR Congo, which was formerly known as Zaire. Most Congolese came as refugees, and the largest numbers are in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There have been a fairly large number of immigrants from Ecuador come to the U.S., and they tend to also be heavily concentrated, especially in Queens, New York. 5% of the population of Queens is Ecuadorian alone. Egypt is a huge country that has proportionately sent very few immigrants to the U.S., but where you find the largest number of Egyptians is in Staten Island, New York. There have not been a large number of immigrants to the U.S. from the South Pacific island of Fiji, but 1/3 of all Fijians in the U.S. are in Sacramento, California. The Gullah are a Caribbean African Creole group that live primarily in the low country areas of the Carolinas and Georgia. During slavery, the Gullah were kept more isolated, and as a result, a unique culture emerged. And to this day, where you find the largest number of people with Gullah ancestry is the South Carolina coast between Charleston and Beaufort. Guyana is a country in northern South America bordering the Caribbean, and there have been a large number of people from Guyana immigrate to the U.S., especially the Richmond Hill district of Queens. And people from Guyana represent the second largest foreign-born population in Queens. Hawaiians are of course not immigrants, and most live in Hawaii, but where on the mainland you find the most Hawaiians is in Las Vegas. And because there are so many Hawaiians living in Vegas, it's often referred to as Hawaii's ninth island. Indonesia, the fourth most populous nation on Earth, but not a ton of immigrants coming from there to the U.S. Where you find by far the most is in the Los Angeles metro area, with pockets in Glendale and the San Gabriel Valley. Los Angeles is also home to the largest number of people with Iranian ancestry as well. And sometimes you'll hear the west side of LA referred to as Tehrangeles. When I was living in LA, I knew a lot of people that were Iranian, but they all referred to themselves as Persian. Jamaica is the most populous English-speaking island in the Caribbean, and there have been many immigrants come from there to the U.S. Most of the earliest immigrants from Jamaica to the U.S. went to Brooklyn, but more recently they've been going to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Kazakhstan is one of the 5 stands that was part of the former Soviet Union, and when it broke up, many people from Kazakhstan emigrated to the U.S. They didn't come over in huge numbers, but the largest community is in Reston, Virginia, in the D.C. suburbs. A similar situation for the Central Asian country of Kyrgyzstan. Not a ton of Kyrgyz immigrants in the US, but after the fall of the Soviet Union, most of the ones that came to the US came to Chicago. And that is, in fact, where you have the largest community of Kyrgyz Americans. Liberia is a very poor West African nation that has seen many refugees come to the US recently. Like many other refugee groups, a big port of entry is the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in Minnesota. The Lutheran Church plays a large part in some of these refugee aid programs, and because Lutherans are also prevalent in Fargo, North Dakota, you see a lot of Liberians there as well. Malta is a small island country in the Mediterranean Sea. It's been fought over many times through the centuries. There are not many people of Maltese ancestry in the US, but more than half of the people in the country that do have Maltese ancestry are in Detroit and the suburbs. I want to thank viewer Eric for letting me know about the fairly large population of people from the Marshall Islands living in Springdale, Arkansas. It's a very interesting story. It was literally just one guy from the Marshall Islands that got a job at the Tyson Chicken Factory in Springdale, Arkansas, and then after he was there, he told family and friends, hey, it's great here, come follow me to Arkansas. And so the NWA, the Northwest Arkansas metro area, has about 500,000 people, and about 3% are Marshallese. Mexican ancestry is very ubiquitous throughout the southwestern US, and off the top of my head, I can name a bunch of small towns that are essentially 100% Mexican. So for this, I wanted to go with the county that has the highest percentage of the population that is Mexican, and that's Starr County, Texas. The county has about 65,000 people, and about 98% are Mexican. There have not been a huge number of immigrants and refugees coming from the Himalayan nation of Nepal, but for the ones that have come to the US, they've largely concentrated in the Jackson Heights neighborhood of Queens. So it's not just home to a large Nepalese community, but also to the United Sherpa Association. Pakistanis have come to the US in relatively large numbers, but are not heavily concentrated in any one particular spot. The vast majority of Pakistani Americans are in the New York City metropolitan area, but they're all throughout the metro and not just in one particular spot, although the heaviest concentrations of people with Pakistani ancestry is in Queens. Another country where not a whole lot of immigrants have come to is Panama, and the largest number of people with Panamanian ancestry in the US are found in Brooklyn. Of all of the Latin American countries in the world, Paraguay is the one that has sent the smallest number of immigrants to the US. It has the smallest Hispanic ethnicity in the US, but where you find the largest number of people from Paraguay is in Queens. And in doing the research for these videos, I find it very fascinating that Queens and Brooklyn are essentially Little Earth. The South American nation of Peru has sent a decent number of immigrants to the US. The New York suburb of Paterson, New Jersey is where you have the largest number of Peruvians in the world outside of Peru. It's referred to as Little Lima, and the prime intersection in that part of town is called Peru Square. Samoans in the US are either American citizens from the territory of Samoa or they're immigrants from the country of Samoa. So of course most Samoans are going to live in Samoa, but for the mainland you find the largest number of them living in the Seattle suburbs of SeaTac and White Center. Senegal is a French-speaking West African country, and most of the immigrants from there came to the US went to East Harlem, the part of town called Le Petit, Senegal. And in fact, when I was in New York last year walking around that part of town, I heard plenty of French being spoken on the street. Sierra Leone is a very poor West African country that was at civil war in the 90s, and many refugees came over to the US then. Most of the refugees came to the Washington, D.C. suburbs, and also most of the refugees were educated professionals. Sri Lanka is a country that historically hasn't had a lot of immigrants move to the US, but recently there have been quite a few come. And where you've seen the largest number of them concentrate is in the Tompkinsville area of Staten Island, New York. Staten Island isn't known for having a large number of ethnic enclaves, but they do have quite a large one for Sri Lankans. Tonga is an independent island nation in the South Pacific, and there has not been a large number of people from Tonga immigrate to the US, but most of the ones that have come from Tonga came with the Mormon Church and have settled in the Salt Lake City, Utah area where there is a large Tongan community. Turkish is an ethnic group that has come over to the US in decently large numbers, but not heavily concentrated in any one spot. There are no little Istanbuls anywhere in the US, but where you find the largest number of people with Turkish ancestry is in Long Island, east of Queens. Uruguay is one of the least populated Spanish-speaking countries in the world, and there have not been huge numbers of Uruguayan immigrants come to the US, but where you have the largest concentration of them are in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is a major port city in the New York City metro area. Uzbekistan is another one of the 5 stands in Central Asia where many people came over to the US after the collapse of the USSR. There have not been huge numbers of Uzbeks immigrate to the US, but where you find the largest numbers of them are in Brooklyn, but there's also a sizable community in San Antonio, Texas. Many immigrants and refugees from Venezuela have been coming to the US, especially to the Miami suburb of Doral. The numbers of people living in Doral or South Florida in general is probably higher than the official numbers. I can't go over all of the ethnicity and nationality groups that have come to the US, but I did want to just go over some of the most interesting ones. So that's part 2 of ethnic enclaves and immigrant areas in the US, and I believe that immigration is the foundation of this country, so I'm glad to see that the wheel of immigration is still turning. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve, and subscribe to this channel if you're interested in learning more about geography from a nerdy perspective. But yeah, thanks for watching. Geography King signing out, dreaming of a Korean-Cuban spicy pork burrito from the Blue Cactus Cafe in Columbia, South Carolina. Good stuff. I'd like to give a special thanks to my superior patrons for their support, especially Minneapolis Dan. If you're interested in purchasing a pin for the viewer pin map or just to support the channel, please visit my Patreon page, link in the description. And as always, thank you very much.